there will be nothing in your life that will matter more than how you love your spouse and how that love translates into both of you, husband and wife, engaging your children in ways that are rich and deep and long-lasting.
Kind of paint us a picture of your current dad life, the grandpa life, the dad life kind of season.
As we began, I mentioned that I needed to end a tad earlier than what we had given a possibility, because I get to take my daughter, son-in-law, and two granddaughters to the airport. You know, we've had probably 13, 14 days with them, and it's some of the, and let me put it on two sides, some of the best days and some of the most exhausting days.
Yep.
You know, as a 71-year-old man, I don't have the energy that I once had to be able to get on the floor, jump up, run, keep up, at least with two little girls, 7 and 4. But the reality is, you know, grandparenting is one of those gifts where you get to, first of all, watch your children parent. Nobody would have, no one I know told me about how sweet that was going to be. And all my children, I think, are better parents than Becky and I. And it's really a sweet gift to be able to see our children parent in a way in which they have truly learned from some of our mistakes, and that yet they've also developed their own way of being in the world. But, you know, having adult children, one of the realities that dawns on me virtually every year, and that is you're never done. You are never done. And some of the most complicated days are with adult children.
Yes.
And yeah, our children love us, and yet they are pretty clear and vocal about where they have felt like we have not done well, past and present, and with a deep invitation, with honor and forgiveness, but to grow.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the things I would say is just such a life-giving presence when your children are taking in your life and growing, but when they have the ability to return that, to invite you to grow, that, even with younger children, has a level of mutuality that often I don't think gets talked about in the parenting process.
Well, speaking of talking about that step, you had the courage and vulnerability to have your daughters on your podcast, which I'm going to link that to our audience, because what a gift to kind of reflect. And I believe your oldest is about, so I turned 42 next month. So I'm kind of in that early 40s, kind of that window.
Yep.
So I think similar to your children. What do you, to observe in to a few specifics around, man, my kids are getting this right and I celebrate them. What are some things you would just even affirm, but also share as transferable wisdom to us dads?
Well, I think one of the things that's so important to begin with, and that is we parent from our parenting. We parent from having been parented. And so many of us know that there were some broken parts of our parents that we inhabited and dwelled in and had no choice about. And that brokenness shapes how you parent. But there's also immense beauty often with regard to what our parents offered us. And so we have to engage both words, broken and beautiful. And for some, it is really heartbreaking to say there was very little beauty and just massive brokenness. Then you've got a whole group of people who would honor and say, oh, I had a great childhood. And those people oftentimes are unwilling to actually name some of the heartache, some of the wounds that occurred even through the process of their parenting. And this takes us back to a category of attachment. What's love? And attachment theory is may seem to some people like what arcane and scientific, but it boils down to what research has indicated is a child has a secure beginning if they have attunement, if
Mm,
they have what's called containment,
yeah.
and if they have the ability to have a parent who can repair rupture. And that first category of attunement boils down to I see you,
Mm,
I hear you, I feel your life, both the good, the ill, and the moments that are unpleasant. I will let you shape my inner world, not control me, but shape something of what I'm experiencing. And I think there are a lot of parents that we would have had who, especially I grew up with parents who went through the Great Depression, went through World War II, and to bottom line it, they were highly traumatized people. And they didn't have a whole lot of attunement.
mm,
They didn't have a lot of attunement for themselves,
yeah.
and they didn't offer a lot of attunement to us. So we sort of didn't really get the experience of somebody feeling sad when we're sad or feeling joy when we feel
Mhm.
joy. And I think that's one of the key components of what you offer your children: participation in their inner life, not control, not trying to manage and shape it, but to experience it with them. That matters
Mm,
perhaps more than any one thing. But then the word containment,
yeah.
if we think about it not as control, but as creating a big field,
Mm,
but it's got some fencing.
yeah.
So you are free, 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 free to play, to fail, to struggle. But know that when you're on that jungle gym and you're way higher than you really have the ability to manage, I'm creating containment. In this case, that means I'm going to catch you,
Mm,
or at least I'm, I'm going to do my best to
try.
do. So containment is I'm there to make sure that your choices bear a progressive movement toward goodness,
Hmm.
which isn't the word discipline. It's that notion of I will hold you accountable. I will invite you into the process of where you don't know you can do X, Y, or Z. So there's a little bit of carrot, a little bit of stick,
Hmm.
a little bit of, again, the movement of I'm going to invite you to become more and more independent. And that's what containment offers. But again, back to this bottom line,
Hmm.
we all fail. I mean, the level of failure in parenting, I think, is much higher than what's true in marriages, and
Mm,
certainly what's true with regard to our friendships, our church, our work. So, where you feel the effect of your own failure, I think, is in the context of parenting more than any. So, the ability to handle what will I do when I have failed? My
mm,
child knows I've failed. We know I have unburdened myself. I've been angry. I've been quick. I've been impatient, etc. And so, the ability to name, not just say I'm sorry,
mm,
but to be able to
specific.
name,
Mm,
you know, dad just blew up. Well, even that phrase, dad just blew up, is a third person.
versus owning
So,
personally.
you
Right.
know, I just screamed at you and I am wrong.
Yes.
And I wonder what it made you feel. Do you see how repair of rupture almost always returns to attunement? And if
Mm,
we can, in one sense, hold those three realities as the nature of what is love. So
yeah.
when you say, "Oh, my dad loved me,"
Mm,
all right, great. That's wonderful. How attuned was he?
mm,
Not much. Okay. How about containment?
mhm,
Oh, yeah, I met the switch a lot. Oh,
mm.
baby, that's not containment.
No.
That's not the invitation to explore and fail and yet have strong arms underneath you. How about an ability to apologize, to name. So I've worked with people many times where I'll hear a phrase like, oh, my dad loved me, my mom loved me. Let's go back through these categories: attunement, containment, repair of rupture. And when you sort of fall flat on your face, when you begin to name, no, not much of that, not much of that, and really none of that, then what do you mean by love? Well, they did their best. Yeah, that'll work well when you stand before the face of God. Um,
Hmm.
and so when you begin to say, you need to hold your own past struggles as inevitably playing out to some degree with regard to your children. And we tend to be extremists on one side or the other. And that is, we overcompensate for attunement when we've had very little. We provide too much control when we've
Sure.
had too much free parenting.
Mhm.
So, one of the, I think, hard but important gifts is to do that kind of, who am I as a parent as a result of reacting to both the brokenness and the beauty of my parents?
Dan, this is so helpful. I think sometimes of the visual of upstream looking back at my story, my interaction with my mom, my dad, and then downstream, how am I being that's affecting directly my four little girls? Would you take us deeper into, and I know there's so many layers of complexity. You do whole workshops around story and looking upstream, downstream. I don't know if you use that language, but
It's brilliant,
help.
by the way. I don't use it, but it sounds very, very, very apt.
Hmm.
So, as a fly fisherman, I don't know why I haven't used that language. Really brilliant. Thank you.
Well, yeah,
I'll
just take
try to
us into a
remember
little
to give
deeper
you
of,
credit.
yeah, thank you, Dan. But the having the courage to go into my own story and look upstream and really, my dad passed away 4 years ago, so some of that is going to be reflective, myself, prayerful journals, not with him in conversation, but there's still work to be done. That is, it's a gift. All the time I spend upstream is a gift downstream to my little girls. Would you explain that a little deeper? How that parlays?
Well, and again, once I get too far into the weeds, you can redirect. But
Okay.
our brains are literally built to hold reality through story. So when you see a fact, you don't see the fact as nothing other than the brute reality. You weave it into something of meaningfulness in order to keep it as impactful.
Mhm.
So, in one sense, we are story making beings. So, we're constantly assessing our world in accord with paradigms. But the moment you use the word paradigm, you're actually talking about the nature of a story.
Mhm.
So the Bible, 70% story,
Mhm.
seems rather important to God. And certainly the way that we are neurologically built, we interpret the world through the range of our own explicit and implicit memories, and every memory is a form of a story. So when we ask you to go upstream, as you put it so well, what we're basically saying is, what shaped you to be who
Mhm.
you are? You didn't come out of the womb fully formed. You came out with proclivities, capacities, but your environment, your earliest learning environment, shaped how you perceive suffering, how you perceive joy, how you perceive
Mhm.
risk. And so, can we begin to build at least an overarching notion of how you approach life? So that comes out of story. So a person who's a risk taker, for example, is a very different story than the person who's very conservative and security minded. Neither is better, neither is worse. But to know what is the proclivity built into your way of being in the world isn't just a language like, well, I'm a risk taker. It's like, what are the stories that actually shaped you to take certain risks when your brother, your sister is so very different. So once you begin to get a feel for, and it's really a good word, feel, like put your
Mhm.
hands on the wood, feel the grain, have a sense of how the contours actually are shaped, you can now downriver begin to see some of the predictive elements of, if I'm demanding that my son or daughter take risks that I was not allowed to take,
Mhm.
well, you're not really paying attention to your child.
Mhm.
You're living out the effects of a parenting strategy on your father's part that you didn't like, and you're going to make sure your children don't suffer. So oftentimes we're trying to correct, which is a beautiful thing, but we often overcorrect because we've not actually faced something of the trauma that
Mhm.
we're working out in our current life. So, you've got Faulkner and others who have put it brilliantly. The past isn't the past, it's still being played out in the
Mhm.
present. And so, until we begin to own the past, we don't really have the ability to fully shape the future as we most desire.
So the shaping and or the owning and then shaping, I know that the painful parts of my story, though I know are it's worth it to go in with a counselor, go in with my friends and like explore like this is how I'm feeling today because of what happened there. It's still with me. uh, I still it's easier to numb or to push it aside or avoidance. The easier is to say no, it doesn't impact my decisions today, so I can leave that in the past. How would you encourage me to no be courageous, schedule the appointment with the counselor? How would you encourage me to don't leave it alone? It's coming forward.
Well, and maybe the hardest sentence to say is it's so obvious, even as you talk about your four girls, like you would die for them. I mean, you are a faithful, I'm sure because you're a sinner, you fail, but you're a faithful father who really wants goodness for your children. And it's a little bit like, let me change a very different image to this. So you play pickleball, you play
Uh-huh.
tennis, you
Yeah.
ski, yeah, whatever. And you simply know that you've got certain skills that are actually excellent. But if you're planning on a major hike, the idea of, you're in your early 40s, you're probably in great shape. But if you don't do a bit of work beforehand, you're going to be sucking air.
Yep.
And so I think that's the image that I
Yep.
would offer. And that is, do you think parenting comes naturally? Do you think it's just that, you got the chops to do this? I mean, it's the hardest job in the universe. And so no preparation, no plan, no exercise beforehand. So I think that opening is to be able to say, there will be nothing in your life that will matter more than how you love your spouse and how that love translates into both of you, husband and wife, engaging your children in ways that are rich and deep and long lasting. So, again, people have heard this a million times, but I've not met, I've had two dear friends die this last year, and neither of them at the ends of their life would have said, I wish I had worked more.
Right.
I wish I had made more money. Again, their grief, and they were both good men and both really good fathers,
Mhm.
but their grief in the departure was, I no longer get to be directly a father, a husband, as I have been. So that's just the existential and the mortality issue of being able to underscore, like, you need to be talking with other men And that's why I love your podcast and the orientation of what you're doing. You're getting men to talk with other men about the nature of what's involved in being a good father. And so much of this is just hearing other men go, I don't know what I'm doing. And like nobody gave me any kind of, shall we say, tutelage on what it meant to be a father. I learned so much about what it meant to be a father by watching my wife be a good mother. And in that sense, having a heart to say every day, I'm a new learner, I'm a
Yes.
beginner. And in that, I'm not going to deny I've got something to offer today, but I need so much more to be able to live out well. And it's not just for their sake. I think this is one of the strange parts. It's mutual. Like I was with my 6-year-old grandson. He got a new spinning rod, and as a fly fisherman, I must admit, I don't have too much prejudice against that. But and yes, I did buy him his first fly fishing rod. But we went out
Fantastic.
to a lake, no fish,
Mhm.
absolutely no fish,
Mhm.
and we fished for probably 90 minutes. And after about 90 minutes, he looked at me, and goes, "Papa, I'm exhausted." And I'm like, "Oh, Gus, you've done so well. Look how much further you're throwing at the end than you did at the beginning." And he just looked at me and he said, "This is the best day of the year." And
Beautiful.
I'm like, "Okay, kid, you want college? You want your first Mustang? It's yours, buddy." Of course, I can't afford it, but the bottom line becomes, oh my gosh, I walked away and my wife looked at me when I got back and she said, "Did you catch a lot of fish?" I said, "Nothing." She
Mhm.
goes, "How is it possible? You look so happy." And it's
Mm.
like, oh, I got an honor that will not be equivalent to any honor other than what I have heard from my grandson.
Mm.
So that sweet gift of mutuality, and it's pretty infrequent that you as a parent get that kind of feedback from a child.
Yeah.
But when you do, we're talking gold, utter gold. And yet it doesn't happen without planning, preparation, a sense of purpose, but also that gift of I've got so much more to learn. And I
S-
feel that.
Yeah, that reward that you're describing, to do hard things, to enter painful conversations, to explore memories of, man, that was, I don't want to go back there. If we know that the gift is for our kids, the gift is for our grandkids, the gift is for ourselves, the gift is for our marriage, because any of the healing we experience from our upstream story gets played out. I mean, it truly has unlimited positive impact areas if we can experience some healing. So, yeah, I love that. I know that my like signals of, oh, there's more to be explored here, often are in moments of my emotions flare up. I'm like, where did that come from? Like, where I'm feeling something. And I'm usually actually, most of these moments are to my wife, Michelle. She sees like, what is up? There's clearly something up here, and I would love to just explore with you if you could explain a little more those moments where our feelings, our emotions, are something's triggered. How do we be kind to ourselves in those moments, and how do we explore a little further what's behind them?
Well, and you've already put it brilliantly. So I'll simply repeat what you just put words to. The first thing that happens with a trigger is that it's unexpected. We usually can't predict it, but when it happens, we're flooded.
Yeah.
And even if we're not flooded to the point of a tsunami, we're still taken over to a degree. And it's important to know that there is an actual brain bio process happening. Your body is being flooded to some degree with stress biochemicals like cortisol and adrenaline and noradrenaline and the catecholamines. And so this isn't something you just choose to not engage. You have to be able to name, I'm being flooded, I'm being triggered. But even with the word triggered, that's why I prefer almost the word flooded. I'm being flooded right now. And if
Yeah.
all I do is pretend I'm not, then the waters are going to get higher, not
Mm,
lower. So I need to be moving to high ground in that moment
mm,
where some degree of flooding occurs.
mm.
And usually that means some degree of pause, like
Yes.
step out. You find yourself on the border of yelling at one of your kids, and you just know, yeah, they may be irritating you, but your anger is not compensate to the nature of the pushback or the lack of patience on the part of your child. What do?
Mm,
Well, take 90 seconds. And that's what
mm,
research would indicate. 90 seconds will allow about 10% of that flooding to go down and to be able just to go like walk to the garage. If you're about to go somewhere, you know there's nothing you need in the garage. Walk to the garage.
Go. Yes.
Like if you don't want to take a walk, go to the bathroom. I don't have to go to the bathroom. Close the door.
Mhm.
You don't have to take your pants down. Just sit on the toilet for 90 seconds. Might take you a little bit more. But literally, what you're doing is you're lowering your stress
Mm,
biochemicals. And in that process of pausing, yeah, there's the step that you were putting words to, and that is what's going on? Now, how you say that phrase is going to be the issue of kindness.
mhm.
What's going on? What's wrong with you is not helpful. Or blaming the other, like, what's wrong with you? So contempt towards yourself or toward others is how we often resolve our sense of feeling out of control.
Yeah.
If we can blame ourselves or blame somebody else, we have a restoration of power. Bizarre that blaming myself gives me power when I feel some degree of helplessness, but it's true.
Mm,
So being able to go, and this passage means the world to me. Romans chapter 2, verse 4, it is the kindness of God
mm.
that leads to repentance. And then Paul asks such a poignant and hard question. Why do you treat the kindness of God with contempt? So we've got to wrestle with our own contempt for ourselves, for others, and to be able to go, no, kindness is not niceness. Let's be very clear. This isn't just being pleasant,
Mm.
getting along. No, kindness is, I want goodness,
Yes.
your glory. And
Wow.
I want goodness for my glory.
Yeah.
So to be able to be kind, and again, not that it's an attractive image, but as I'm sitting on the toilet with my clothes on because I'm about to erupt at one of my children who's 44 and 40 and 36. Uh, and I'm like, you're triggered.
Mm.
Take a pause,
Yep.
90 seconds, go sit down, and then to be able to say, Dan, what is going on? And almost always, it's a degree of hurt,
Yeah.
disappointment.
Mm.
Now, can we tend to that without indulging and, in some sense, making us the core issue? But can we begin to go, yeah, that comment by your 44-year-old daughter hurt? And
Mm.
she's not meaning to slap you in the face, but you heard it. And maybe there's something eventually to come back to, but just do you wish kindness toward her and toward
Mm.
your own heart? I think that will begin the settling process to then be asking the question, what else might be going
Yeah.
on given one's own history and one's story?
This is so helpful, Dan. Beyond attunement, containment, repair, that framework, which is so helpful, I want to move us a little bit to the stories of our kids, especially, dads in maybe my season of younger kids. And we're looking, I've heard it kind of joked about before. Well, I'm saving money for their college and I'm saving money for their future counseling because they're going to need it because of me. Like I've heard that kind of joke. And that, like, I love that care of just an awareness of knowing, hey, I am going to cause some pain to my kids. But at the same time, I want to make decisions today that causes them to move with love and care and kindness to not have those hurts in the future. So any other just tips for us younger dads, or this will help them in that journey?
Well, think in terms of there are two great enterprises. And again, I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but what's called the cultural mandate, Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 through 28, in terms of male and female, he created them in the image of God. And then there's this fill and multiply, subdue and rule.
Mm,
And those two elements of fill and multiply, I would say the very essence of that is it isn't just about having children, but it's the nature of intimacy where fruit is able to be grown. So your children need to grow in intimacy with you, intimacy with their siblings, with their grandparents, etc. So that's one great, shall we say, it's way more important than learning to read,
yep.
way more important than learning multiplication tables. Now,
Mm,
all four, third grade, fourth grade, et cetera, and all the tasks, but you keep your eye on the ball. And the ball, at least at the beginning of the cultural mandate, is fill and multiply, be intimate. The second is subdue and rule.
mm,
And that's the notion of having an impact in the world. And in other words, not just having an impact, but growing the beauty of the world to be even greater than it is.
mm,
So that's the notion of honor, or the idea that we are meant to be uniquely different, individuated, independent. So you've got two great callings in life. One is to grow in intimacy, one is to grow in a sense of impact and independence. Being in that position to be able to say, my first child, Annie, was like her first day in preschool. We had moved, and the teacher said to her, how are you feeling, Annie? And my daughter, age 4, says, well, I'm feeling somewhat ambivalent. And the teacher went, well, Annie, what does it mean to feel ambivalent? And she looked at the teacher like, and the teacher is telling me this later, like, are you an idiot? You don't know the word ambivalent? And she said, well, I feel somewhat excited. This is very new and I'm unsure, so I'm a little scared. And
mm,
so I feel both excited and sad at the same time. So if you mess with my daughter at age 4 or 5, you're dealing with a highly articulate,
mhm,
independent, her world need to be managed the way she wanted to be. She didn't have a whole lot of trouble with independence,
right,
but she struggled even as a young child with intimacy.
mm,
If I looked at my second daughter, she was a snuggler. She was so sensitive to the tensions in the room. Her level of emotional intelligence was off the charts. And yet she had a very hard time making decisions.
mm,
And so what I'm saying is, as long as you've got clarity about what the war really is, yeah, we want our children to have an education, to have a future, to be able to get better at sports, but there's only two things that matter: intimacy, independence,
Yes.
and holding them together. Oh my goodness. Because many who choose independence bear a certain risk and a lack of trust for intimacy. Some who have a much more intimate, connected sense have a hard time making decisions that upset others. So, what I'm saying is, as an adult, how are you holding together both intimacy and individuation or independence? And because you're called to fill and multiply, subdue and rule. So if you're struggling with that, which I am,
Yeah, me too.
then why would you be surprised
Mm.
that your children are? This is the reality. We live in a
Mm.
sinful world, in a broken world, as already with a proclivity to our own false independence. So our task is, in some sense, to parent in a way that accentuates the giftedness while also helping a child name and engage the parts of their own world
Mm.
that don't come as quickly or naturally.
Yeah.
So that's why I think those two, if you will, they're North Stars. I know
Yeah, they
there's
are.
one, but
Yeah.
it's that combined North Star that allows me clarity, even with my adult children, to be able to say, as a parent, I'm still engaging their invitation to intimacy and to independence.
Dan, we want to move beyond sparking thoughtfulness or good thoughts or good intentions to being dads of action. And within this, I mean, I'm sure the dads listening have already been sparked with a man. There's parts of my story that, if healed, if I experience wholeness there, would impact in such positive ways my kids, my marriage, my circle of friends. I immediately think to like action steps like seeing a counselor, reading potentially one of your books or a book on like, let's go into this. Friends, like bringing this to our friends or going into a conversation with a spouse. What would you guide to just say, do something? What are some of the next steps you would encourage the dads who are wanting to explore?
Well, and again, I know they can't see us, but what I'd say is you should always have a pad of paper and a pen not far from you.
Mm.
And again, a lot of men will go, I don't journal. It's like, well, can you write 2 sentences? Can you write five? A lot of this is literally finding a way to take what is inchoate and abstract and just sort of filtering through us and letting it become very black and white and clear.
Yeah.
uh, to write down, as you've interacted with one of your children, I make too many demands of this child
Mm.
that I don't make of others in my family. Wow. Well, that's priceless awareness. And all it took you was one sentence to name each child triggers something different in you, both beautiful and broken.
Yeah.
So, can you begin to say, as you begin to take notes on one child, like I have, I mean, my children, when I pass, will have massive amounts of information about my thoughts about them, each and every one of them. I take notes. And again, when I say take notes, sometimes it's literally no more than a clause, more than that was an incredibly difficult conversation with Andrew over X or Y.
Yeah.
And in that, what I want for myself is clarity.
Mm.
And you just named a bunch of fabulous things, but it begins with, I think, like write it out,
Yeah.
write 2 sentences out, 3 sentences out. Then who does that get shared with?
Mm.
And I would say, here's my order of priority. First and foremost, with your wife. And in that sense, you're opening the door to levels of conflict, because a lot of times we know that one of the four major areas that's of concern and conflict in a marriage happens to be how you parent. So there are going to be tensions of difference of opinion, et cetera, et cetera. Just stepping into that, oftentimes, even without resolve, will create a level of intimacy between you and your spouse because at least you're talking. Then, second, what I would say is a group of men, two or three other men that you're going, hey, let me just tell you what happened. You know me well enough to know a lot about how I live. Can you give me your reflections?
Yeah.
So, from your spouse to some of your compatriots, and then third, into what I would call story guides.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, usually that's a therapist, but could
Yeah.
be a coach, could be a really good pastor, it could be a really good plumber. I don't care who it is. But in our day,
Yeah.
I would say in most occasions, that's usually a good therapist to begin that process, as you put it so well, going backstream,
Yeah.
going downstream. If you go up and then you begin to think about how the up is affecting the down, back and forth, all I can say is a good-hearted man who's open to new data, to literally learning year by year what it means to parent well, because parenting a 2-year-old is a whole lot different than a 5-year-old, et cetera,
Yes.
et cetera. So what's required at every stage is so different that in some sense, you need help as a parent as your child makes transitions. Those transitions are going to awaken within you things you weren't aware of in those prior years,
Yeah.
especially as you get into adolescence and
Mm.
sexuality, and a kind of peer-oriented life versus a parent-oriented life. Oh my gosh, it's just, this is all about you being transformed in a way in which the love you offer teaches and
Yeah.
invites them to see the face of God.
Dan, this has been so helpful. I'm so grateful for you. You guys just celebrated 500 episodes of your podcast. We celebrated 300 episodes a few months ago. So I can and just sending our Dad Awesome community, and I will, to your books, your podcast. There's a story workshop in Atlanta coming up that I know it's got a live stream as well. So I'm going to link all that in the conversation notes. So grateful for you. Would you say just a short prayer over all of us,
I
dads?
would. And again, two things before I end. One, it's so apparent as we talk what wisdom you bring, and yet your own awareness of the need to continue to grow. That's what I would hope, that we can trust the wisdom we do have, and yet what seems almost contradictory, but the ability to also say, I've got so much more to grow.
Yeah.
That should be there until you take your last breath.
So
So
good.
to Father, thank you. Son, thank you. Spirit, thank you. Thank you for the life you have given each of us. And what you wish for each of us to bring to one another is a taste of your love, a taste of your righteousness, and a taste of your kindness. So we ask in this day, no matter what the day holds, that there would be a sense of anticipation, not dread, sense of looking into the day as to what you're doing and what we can do to bring something of that taste to others. We ask that all in your name, Jesus. Amen.